I'll be brief in my introduction. I've never been good at. But this time I think it's because I'm very nervous about protecting my identity and that of others. I'll use pseudonyms and omit certain details that won't change the story itself. I'll refer to myself as Whitley Reddit. Seems like a place where I can well share this information without it being noticed or taken seriously. I've kept this secret for 16 years, but sadly, despite the risk to me and my family, I've decided that I need to confess in some way. This is my story. I grew up in Fairbanks. Fairbanks is pretty much like most towns in the southern states, only surrounded by the typical freezing nothingness of Alaska anyway. Like many young people do, I enlisted in the Army at 18, and to make a long story short, in 2002, I was stationed in Fairbanks at Fort Wright. It was a strange time for the armed forces after 9/11, the young Seab Army more than ever, of course. But I mean strange in another sense. The pride of the armed forces had been beaten by a group of terrorist hijackers, and now the Army as a whole was, for lack of a better word, paranoid. It was as if Mike Tyson had been slapped in public. By another man, the radars were revamped and constantly monitored to prevent another attack on American soil. And that is partly why I am here with a story to tell. On March 13th, 2002, multiple military and civilian radars detected an object entering Alaska airspace and apparently crashed into the nearby Yukon Flats Wildlife Refuge. I was selected along with 10 other men by one of our superiors, Brown, what we called a search and rescue mission to locate the crashed object. There were a few things that didn't add up about this operation. It was treated almost like a full-blown exercise. We were told it was basically preparing us for war. At the time I assumed it was because of the stigma surrounding suspicious plane crashes. But now I'm not so sure. Another reason things were so strange was that one of the highest-ranking officers at Hatfield Base was going to accompany us on this mission that didn't make sense to me at the time. Why would they send old Hatfield out into the middle of a frozen wasteland to identify a plane crash when Brown was more than capable? I would soon have answers, too, that the helicopter ride was shorter than expected. In a helicopter were me, Hatfield, Brown. Flynn Brads and Dobbs on the other was Brown's second-in-command. Anderson, who was now third-in-command on this mission. Carter, Ramos, Smith, Wallace, and Morgan. Of course, there were 2 pilots as well. Hatfield was a quiet and polite man. He had always been highly respected and feared as a leader, but when we reached the last ridge and saw what we had come for, it changed when the moon lit up the dark Alaskan night. We came upon a huge, dark gray, cylindrical object, burning in flames, in a large clearing, surrounded by snow trees and a nearby pond. It was about the size of a 747, but there were no wings or propulsion system visible at first glance. I thought it was an experimental plane from here, or from Russia. Hatfield's new behavior told a different story. "It's a huge plane," said Dobbs, who received a look of pure fury and disgust from Hatfield. He stared at him through an awkward silence, accompanied only by the sound of the propellers, until he growled, "Yes, I wish it was a plane." When we finally landed, it was pretty clear to all of us what we had in front of us. But no one. I wanted to say it. We understood silently, and followed the orders that Hatfield gave us angrily. We landed, and he told us to approach the object with our weapons drawn, as the surrounding flames began to quickly die down. Overwhelmed by the frigid temperatures, Hatfield ordered us to stop when he deemed that were close enough. and it was then that we all noticed that a passerby was walking towards us with his hands raised as if saluting or surrendering. Hatfield seemed more annoyed than anything else when we landed, and the presence of this passerby enraged him even more. "Can you believe it?" said the older man. "Do you know what the hell this is?" Hatfield looked at the ground for a moment, shook his head and walked over to shake the man's hand. "What exactly did you see here tonight, sir?" asked Hatfield with an exaggeratedly sarcastic smile. Somehow he was sweating, almost profusely in the cold night in Alaska. "Well," the passerby said, "my house is a little bit." In that direction I heard him, and he is seeing exactly the same thing as me when I approached Hatfield, looked him straight in the eyes all the time, smiling and nodding like a madman that should explain Hatfield's next course of action. "That is not the answer I was looking for, Go Mine," said Hatfield. This comment drew a confused expression on the face of the passerby, similar to the one he put on after Hatfield pulled out a gun and shot him 4 times in the chest. We were all in a state of simultaneous shock and understanding. He had just murdered an innocent man, but all for the supposed well-being of the rest of humanity. Let this serve as a lesson to all those who do not understand it. Bram Hatfield. No one must find out what is going on or has happened here tonight, unless they are asked by their superiors, or else they may end up like this man who just died tragically in a hunting accident a minute ago. None of us were new to the military. We knew that, despite all the shady things we would see in our service, our best options were to follow orders and not ask questions. Talking about following orders, Hatfield broke the silence and ordered us to investigate. The crashed object had split into several sections, but they were still close to each other. We entered through the gap in the ship closest to what we assumed was the front. The inside of this thing was fittingly straight out of a sci-fi movie. The walls of the elongated control room were covered in unknown technology and strange symbols. I should have seen it coming, but the sight of 2 humanoid bodies leaning against the wall to my right freaked me out. The beings were about 5 feet tall. They were thin with pale gray skin and long appendages. Seeing them, Brown let out a surprised, "No fucking hell, they are the damn parents of it." Hatfield took one look at them and muttered angrily, "Of all the people who could have had to clean this guy up, it had to be." I pulled out his radio to talk to the helicopter pilot. "Guardian 1 here." Hatfield read me over. "Guardian 1 here, Hatfield. What is your situation?" I changed the radio, crackling. "Tell base that we have a level 5 Orion code and that they need to send a team to ASAP to handle this. Tell them that it is something big and that they must bring as many vehicles and personnel as necessary, according to protocol." Over, said Hatfield, trying to stay calm. Received, Hatfield. Over. "Okay, let's move on," said Hatfield, pointing to the back of the object. We continued our search until we came to a room towards the back of the ship. The room was damaged in some parts that faced the outside. There was another body in the room, but something was different. Although this body was of the same type as those in front of the ship, it was visibly shattered. The most notable mark was a large hole that went through the torso of the being. "Good God, what happened to that?" he asked Anderson. It looked as if someone had pierced his body with a pole in the room. There were 2 large side compartments made of a different material than the rest of the interior. We thought they were some kind of cells. But for what? Hatfield, "Come see this," Brow said from the opposite side to where we had landed, and entered. Hatfield came closer, and seeing what Brow was pointing at, he let out a soft and worried, "Oh my God." We all came closer to see what they were looking at. A trail of large, circular footprints leading out of the object and heading towards the nearby trees. I am sure that all of who were there deduced it, at the same time that it was in one of those cells it escaped upon landing. It killed the creature that was in the room with it, and fled into the wilds of Alaska. Perhaps the worst of all is that we were the ones who were going to have to go out and hunt it. Bradshaw and Flynn were the lucky ones who stayed behind waiting for the cleanup team to arrive, while the rest of us had to follow Brown to find that thing. Before he got too far away, I wasn't quite sure if the order was to capture it alive, or kill it if we found it. I only knew that we were going in blind to hunt down whatever was locked in that ship. The woods were completely dark compared to the clearing where the ship had crashed. The vegetation was so dense that the only source of light was the flashlights on our rifles as we moved in formation through the woods following Hatfield, who was on the trail of the creature. Compared to the rest of the men I had served with, I would consider the group I was with to be the most select set of individuals I had ever been a part of. They were not rookies. They were men. They were the best soldiers Ford Wright could offer. And there was a reason we had been sent here, because they knew that anything could have crashed here, even something out of our worst nightmares. From the beginning, we were all focused and acted professionally. We had a job to do, and we weren't going to mess around. It didn't take long to figure out where the tracks were taking us. We came to a huge cave at the base of one of the nearby mountains. Hatfield pulled out his pistol and turned towards us. "Watch out, gentlemen, we got you. Brown takes the lead. The rest, follow me." The cave was huge, with many different compartments, but none of them were very deep. So we continued down the main tunnel until Brown stopped the line and muttered a "my God" that we could all hear. He shined his flashlight on a brown bear, probably 200 to 300 kilos, which was in the same condition as the creature we had found in the cell room. Also had a huge circular hole, identical to the tracks we had followed, was sitting against the wall of the cave dead. I could feel every man in the cave slowly receding into his inner child as primal fear took hold of them. This thing we were hunting had entered. A bear's den. Grizzly had killed it and left it there. If he could do that to a bear, imagine what he would do to us. Wallace was the one unlucky enough to say what most of us were thinking. "We need to get out of here right now." He received a death stare from Hatfield, who proceeded to scold him. "Stop being a coward. Wallace men have been killing bears for centuries. We turned those fuckers into rugs with a snap of our fingers. We have a job to do. Take this thing down. And as your superior, I order you to ask some questions." The compartment fell silent, and our courage was restored a little. We remembered that we were men and that we had a job to do. The compartment we were in. Clearly the old bear den was divided into 3 tunnels. Brown took Smith and Wallace through the right tunnel. Anderson took Carter and Ramos through the left tunnel, and I went with Morgan and Hatfield through the middle tunnel. We were silent the whole time. Sure, I had questions, but I wasn't going to ask. Hatfield, we moved forward until the tunnel became too small to continue. So we started to go back to the compartment as radio communications weren't working in the cave. We agreed that he would meet us if we finished the search, or if something went wrong. When we were about halfway back, We started to hear gunshots and the screams of our comrades. We ran back through the tunnel to the compartment where Brown and his group were already waiting for us. "It seems he comes from Anderson's group," said Brown. "Well then, let's go down. Whitley, you go to the front," said Hatfield, trying to hide his nerves. We moved silently through the tunnel, moving as fast as possible. The reality was that if no one from Anderson's group had joined us, something had gone very wrong. As I was in front, I was the first to see Ramos. As we turned a corner in the cave, he was sitting against the wall, clearly trying to hide from something. When he saw us, he sighed in relief and stood up quickly, indicating for us to keep quiet. I will never understand what led Hatfield to ask Ramos out loud, "What the hell happened down here?" But the very moment he did, it was as if hell itself was unleashed upon us from the dark abyss behind Ramos. A huge pale red appendage pierced his body. The lights from our rifles illuminated something that not even in my worst nightmares could I have imagined. A huge mantis-like creature had just impaled Ramos, whose body was launched towards me, hitting me, and making me retreat towards the group. What it was total chaos of gunfire and carnage that followed when I saw the first of the group turn to flee. I did the same. I took a quick look around the corner to see a group of veteran military men, trained and experienced, possibly at the top of our planet's food chain, being torn apart by that thing. Sure, we were the top of the food chain here, but that thing was not from here. I followed the three men who had fled the cave ahead of me, running for who knows how long, fueled by fear and adrenaline, until we reached the clearing where reinforcements from the base had already arrived and were cleaning up the remains. In fact, another of our superiors, Banks, was on his way to find out what had happened to our group. As we had been cut off for a while, I looked at the rest of those who had fled. It was me, Brown, and Wallace. There was another one, but we were not sure who was or where was Gentleman. What happened to Hatfield? And his group asked Banks. Somehow Brown was calm enough to answer, "They are dead, sir. There is something out there, something from that ship, and we could not stop it." Banks was surprisingly calm when I heard this. "And where is that thing?" Now Brown, we followed him to a cave, and that was where it happened, said Brown. Banks nodded. "Gentlemen, take note. The night of March 13th, 2002, an accident occurred, resulting in the loss of Hatfield and his group. The nature of this accident made their bodies unable to be recovered. Is clear." We all nodded for them. It was over. And finally for us too. They sent us back to Fort Wright, where our superiors interrogated us about what happened, insisting that we should not speak of the incident unless they mentioned it first, and that we had been at the base all day, where an accident occurred, something to do with the fuel tanks or whatever, although this haunted my existence. For the next few years, I knew I had no choice but to leave it behind. So I did. One day some mates took me aside and told me what happened after I left the place. Banks had ordered a massive operation in the cave area with a force much larger than ours. They found something disturbing. Morgan was the other man who was with us. They knew because not far from the cave, they found his body impaled and slammed into a tree with such force that it knocked him down. The footprints of the creature that came out of the body showed that it had fled to the desert and had long since left inside the cave they found, and identified the bodies of Hatfield, Anderson, Ramos, Carter, Smith, and Dobbs, all torn apart by that thing. It was as if the bullets didn't even hurt it. It just riddled them like a machine. Now that I have left the military, I have moved and have had time to finally think. I have decided to tell the truth in a way that I hope does not harm me or my family. I have created this account using information that is difficult to trace back to me, and I am even posting this from a computer in a public library in a state I don't even live in. I hope you take this information for what it's worth, because that thing is still out there, and God only knows where it is and what it's capable of.